Welcome to the T C Random Fandom podcast. We are here to have fun and talk all things pop culture, collecting, and nerd culture in general. Make sure you join the conversation during our live stream with our most excellent hosts, Craig Borden and Tommy Mock. Let the shenanigans begin.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another evening of TNC Random Fandom. I am your host, Craig Borden. I am with you here, as always, with my buddy, Tommy Mock. Welcome back, show, buddy. How was the trip last week?
I was burning the candle at both ends. For those of you who don't know, last weekend I got to film a scene in a student film or a short film, whatever you want to call it. I got to play a cop, which was pretty good, awesome. And then I went and judged and co-host another cosplay contest in Niagara Falls. So it obviously burning the candle at both ends, and the PA system didn't work very well. And so you can watch the video. We'll put a link to the video for my awesome co-host, who is Blue Kitten Cosplay. She was awesome. That was her first time doing it. Fantastic show, but just had to yell the whole time. So like an hour straight, I was just yelling at people, which is...
Enunciate, my friend. Enunciate.
So is this...
I was trying.
Is this more Comic-Con cosplay, or is this like generic cosplay?
No, this was actually... So it's like a small little con. So there's a group out there called Our Cons. So it's OURCONS. And they put on these like little cons around the United States, and they do a few in Rochester. They do, some upstate. And Niagara Falls had an anime fest that they were doing, which is the same setup as the one that Craig and I did in January. So,
nice.
So it is a con. There's another one, and I've already been asked to do it in July. So I believe it's July 13th. So obviously, I'm going to be doing some shameless self-plugs on that one, but you'll be there as well to help out like you did last time. So, but, that's enough about me. Why don't you introduce your friend there, Gregory?
Yes. So Chris Lindstrom, Lunchador Podcast Network, my friend from work, my buddy, my pal. How we doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm going to be in your spiritual homeland of Toronto this upcoming weekend at a furry convention that my wife is selling at. So I am fortunately or unfortunately very well versed in the world of extreme nerdery. And yeah, I'm joining you from the Lunchador Podcast home studio in my house. So yeah, we are a Rochester-based podcast network with 13 shows currently. We're going to be up to about 15 by the end of April. So we cover everything. We're an equitable network for all of our members. Shows own themselves, and we kind of work together as a collaborative to try and grow good things happening in Rochester, from food and drink to the arts, photography, different arts, movies, music, and now we also work with local organizations like in this moment covering luminaries in the Black community of our amazing city. So we're excited to do the work and excited to join you boys tonight to talk about some other nerdery.
Hey,
yeah,
Chris,
definitely
before we get started,
yes, sir.
I want to just say after the show, I'd like to talk to you because obviously Craig and I both have a friend, and he's going to eventually be my future son-in-law. I always refer to him as my future son-in-law, Narada Riley. And
I love Narada.
You know, he's my future son-in-law.
Narada is what a gem of a guy. Like, he is like peak charisma and also gets involved in so many interesting things. So I'll tell you a little story. The first time I met Narada, this was the first edition of Behind the Glass, a local studio, local gallery. So I work with them. They record their first podcast on a laptop. I'm like, hey guys, come over here and do that. So one of the co-founders of the gallery reached out to me and said, hey, I want to come over and check things out on Sunday. Didn't tell me that everybody was coming over to record. Sunday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, I get 3 people walking up to my door and say, "Hey, we're recording a podcast," and Narada being one of them, and
I'm Ron
proceeds to set up,
Burgundy.
yeah, proceeds to set up a camera in the corner of the studio, and it's like constantly click, 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 just taking shots constantly. And this is a smaller setup here in the studio before, but that was the first time I met him, and um, I adore him, and that's really cool that we have that crossover.
I'm texting him right now to watch the podcast.
He will 100% know who I am as well.
I just said, Narada, watch the podcast. You know our guest.
6 degrees from everybody here.
I know, right?
So, anyways, tonight, the topic of choice tonight is we are going to talk all things the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but Phase 1. So this is the first 2 Iron Man movies, the Hulk, Thor, Captain America. I'll say the origin story wave of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, leading up to what was a first in movie cinema with a gathering of so many different characters in one movie after all these solo movies, very comic bookish, in the Avengers. So tonight, guys, we're going to talk about this whole topic, but I want to start specifically. I want to talk about the pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe, the world we lived in with Marvel's ridiculous amount of characters being licensed out at, bottom basement prices to 1,000,001 other studios. This led to what was some really crappy movies over the years, and then some gems, and some that some people maybe took a little too liberties with some of the source material. But I'll say the first real big movie that this really got kicked off, and I'll say the modern movie ballpark here, I remember watching the movie Blade and being like, wow, this is what a comic book movie could be like. Chris, you're our guest. I want to let you kick off that conversation. It doesn't have to be Blade specific, but pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe parts.
I mean, I think the prominent ones that people know best are obviously the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. That was kind of the gem of the pre-phase style Marvel movies. There's a lot of B movies, but like, Spider-Man 1, 2, and we'll count 3 because it's technically a movie that includes a Spider-Man. Like those were not, like, the last one was bad, but mostly because it was overstretched and it went down that route of the Batman movies where you had to have 2 villains in every movie. God forbid you actually focus on one villain and make them an interesting character.
Or an actual story.
Right. Because the other ones, like Blade's a great one, but for many people, that's like that's the B level Marvel bordering on C. So it's obviously the Spider-Man, and then the X-Men series was like that spurred this. The reason why the studio existed was Spider-Man and X-Men, because those all run by Fox, and that the X-Men movies, that first one was like a mind-blowing movie.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you. I think that the X-Men movie is now, when the first one came out, I was just like, oh, these are all the characters that I remember, especially back in the 90s and even early 90s, not even the reboot of like 97, but back in the early 90s when I was still in like high school. They had the X-Men cartoon, and then even in the early 80s we had Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends, and he lived with Firestar and Ice, was it
it was Iceman,
right? Iceman, yeah. Just cheesy names, whatever. But when you finally got to see those characters in live action and not something that was cheesy like, Spider-Man on the Electric Company, for those of you who are old enough to know the Electric Company.
You've seen that one.
But and that's what it was. But I also like some of the hokey comic book, Marvel, like, I have to say it, Nick Cage's, Ghost Rider. I like that movie, and that's a Marvel movie. Could they have done it better? Probably. but you don't get the caginess if you don't, put Nick Cage in it.
Yeah, I mean the Fantastic Four movies, like the first one was watchable, and then the Daredevil ones were like
Ooh.
peak, this is just like you're forcing
I will-
stars into it instead of making it great. And then
Yes.
I
Ang Lee
will say that
Hulk,
I loved Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin. Just saying, I thought that was a wonderful, perfect cast for that time period. But the rest of it, like you said, was just kind of like, oh, all right, fine, this happened.
Yeah.
So you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned the Fantastic Four, because it seems like that is a franchise that they keep trying to do right, and I think that what they're doing is they're trying too hard. I think that they can do this, and maybe they, putting Pedro Pascal in it, this upcoming, maybe they're going to do it a little bit better, but they keep trying so hard to push the Fantastic Four, and they're just overdoing it.
Kind of like shoving it down your throat level.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit tough because the scale gets so big, and that's where DC falls apart sometimes too. And tell where some of the later phases in Marvel fell apart too is when you get galactic in scale. Like on DC, you're fighting for Fantastic Four, you're fighting the Eater of Worlds, you're fighting Galactus, and for DC, you're going against Darkseid, and you're going, it's too big, and sometimes that's hard to it's hard to scope it correctly with like characters that are grounded when you can't possibly scale it to the right level. Feel like you're still dealing with real stories, like people in a story.
It's just,
this seems weird though, because it is a family. You would think that the family core of that whole thing would actually outweigh some of these other pieces and be a nice way of grounding some of that. But I don't know. They have been 100%, to your point, Tommy, struggling with the Fantastic Four, and I would say that is a good way of summarizing the pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe. Is the word struggle. Marvel struggled heavily trying to get some of these characters to the screen for years. It wasn't one of those things where it was an instant success overnight. And while Marvel might have been beating the DC comic people at the actual checkout counters with actual comic books and toys and all these other things, DC Comics destroyed Marvel and beat them to the punch so badly in the movie world, with Batman, Superman being the one that obviously was the one that really kicked it over. But they were behind the 8 ball, even when by the time they threw all the licenses out to everybody and said, go ahead, have fun, make our movies. And I want to say that the actual X-Men license was sold to Fox, or in the ballpark of like $250,000, not million, $1,000, because they were hoping to make money off of the comic book sales that would regenerate from that and the toys. They held the rights to do that. But just holy shnikes, knowing what we know now, having that crystal ball, Marvel was failing up into the ballpark of 2008 when the Iron Man movie came out. And it was that realm of just the licenses didn't exist, and they were in that kind of, like you mentioned, campy ballpark, like almost old school Batman, like 60s, Wild Man Pam level.
Everything after Batman Returns with, when they started changing every Batman, every, movie afterwards.
And then screwing Robin Williams in the process. But that's a whole other story for another evening. So let's dive into that world of what led up to the first Iron Man movie. Marvel realized that, hey, we can do a lot better of a job doing this on our own, coming up with our own stories, using our source material. And they moved the Marvel Studios mantra of what was more or less, I'll say, kids' TV shows, the stuff we grew up with watching, X-Men, which they just rebooted it as X-Men 97 was the animated cartoon. But that was the framework of Marvel Studios before what led up to Iron Man in 2008. So they quickly got a bunch of money from, it was like Wells Fargo or Merrill Lynch or something like that, some giant bank that just said, okay, we want to make these 6 movies. You're going to give us a giant dumpster pile of money to make this and get Marvel Studios up and running. They do that, and they made their money back in spades. But this was a gamble. This was a last-ditch effort. This wasn't something that anybody knew was going to turn into what we have today. And the funnier thing in this whole thing was Kevin Feige was the guy that ends up being the one that does this. Do you know where he actually got his start in film? Because I learned this one recently. I thought it was really amusing. He was a behind-the-scenes guy on the first X-Men movie as like way down the list producer. So he was actually employed by Fox Studios. Exactly. It was like 900 people above him on that list, and then boom, here you go. So Marvel ends up stealing him and recruiting him. And the first Comic-Con that he went to, he was, talking about, hey, we have Captain America. Hey, we have Iron Man. Hey, we have the Hulk. It's not a coincidence that these people make the Avengers. So we're hoping if this goes well, we're going to make the movie The Avengers. So eventually they get to that far with it. And then it just became, okay, great. How do we build these movies? You got to come up with good stories. We had to find great actors and for villains and everybody to support that whole thing. And I think that right there is where Marvel kicked the living hell out of this whole thing. They found the perfect actors for all of these pieces, except for maybe one in phase one, but eventually they fixed that one out. But let's talk the casting of really quick, because I want to just use Iron Man as the way to catalyze this whole conversation. Unless you got something, Tommy.
Yeah, it's on the screen. Narada says hi.
There you go. Oh, that's too funny. So on that note, let's talk how Robert Downey Jr. at this point in his life, career, everything was 100% at the low point. He'd been in jail. He'd had court cases, drug problems. Nobody in Hollywood would touch him. And whatever the reason, Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau, who ended up being, I'll say, the other, figurehead and inception of the what became the Iron Man movie, says, I want Robert Downey Jr. How important to that, Tommy, was this whole thing of being able to get this thing going with him in the helm?
So I got to say, in my opinion, I love a good comeback story. I love a kind of like a true to life redemption story. Robert Downey Jr. was taking at that point whatever he can get it when he can get it, and once he got it, he became humble, and he knows where his bed was made, and when he got sober, he turned his life around. This was the catalyst of all of the other movies to come, playing Chaplin, playing Sherlock Holmes. This was the movie to kind of get him into the forefront, and sometimes you watch him in some of these interviews that he does, he seems like he could be a bit of an ass, but I think that's just him being, I think that's just his sarcastic way. But the man is sober. The man is truly, and from what I've seen, truly humble and grateful for the MCU, because that is what got him back on top and kept him to where he has a life again, he has a career again. I think so, before that, what was his last movie, like Less Than Zero or something like that, and he's in that movie he's pretty much overdosed in the back of a convertible.
Shout out to Bret Easton Ellis.
From Saturday Night Live failure to one of the best movie, one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood, right? So, but Chris, as far as everything goes, so you have Robert Downey Jr. in this role. I think Tommy nailed a little bit of this here, that you had the cocky, you had the brash. Could you have casted a better Tony Stark for this piece? True, I am Iron Man.
I think it's a bit tough, because I think for the style of the Iron Man they ended up with, right? For the style and the tone of the Avengers and everything going forward, I mean, he defined the tone of the entire MCU. Like, that choice of how he acted this, that essentially manic genius, which isn't necessarily the tone of like the comics. he was, like an engineering and like science genius, but he didn't have that like manic kind of ADHD presentation.
It
And
was
that
closer
kind of,
to Bruce Wayne with a drinking problem.
yeah, I mean, hell, he
In the
can still
comic.
have that. But yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Like he was definitely the Batman character because of dollars, right? Dollars and tech. So it's just a different version of that, but that tone is really what got people hooked into this universe, and which is why some of the other movies that we'll dive into didn't quite work, because when you don't have that driving it, that force of nature of chaotic, weird energy, without that, sometimes things kind of fall off in the genre.
To your point on the manic energy on set, because that's what I've also heard during that first movie, because they had a good script. They knew that. They had these great people in there. You had Jon Favreau, who honestly controls most of my current day nerddom. Just saying. So he made an environment during that first movie that was, if there's a good idea, we're going to try it. So apparently one of the things that was ad-libbed on set was the scenes with the robots. The robots weren't supposed to be like characters of any kind, and he just started acting and puppeting and whatever with the crew and goofing around, and they ended up forming a very fun mantra in that ballpark where he was really getting the suit going for the first time, the real one, not the one he had to obviously escape captivity with. But those were things that if you didn't have Robert Downey Jr. there, would have that came out the same exact way? You have the action elements, you have some comedy, which is always the pieces of what Marvel Comics always had. Peter Parker is the great example of that. He always had that nice little way of cutting through whatever the hell was going on with a sarcastic wit. I think, to your point, Chris, that tone rings true to this day, 20 some odd years later, and it still hits just like it did back when. So
yeah, it's
as
a
far
bit
as
tough
Iron Man
because if you don't have that, because you need some of that, not the pain, but somebody who's lived a life. Sometimes you need that to ground that kind of manic, those comedic elements. If it wasn't him, it could feel super forced. And that's the thing people lose sometimes. You try to mimic without having that grounding of somebody who has messed up in their life and was a screw up. Like there's a certain kind of pathos, a certain kind of thing that ties to that. Which, and then if you get too serious, then you lose, you can cash it in too much. I'm excited to go through the rest of these, because that's a huge one. And also, like, the first one that didn't work out long term was in that first Iron Man movie as well.
Yep.
Which is the one I thought was like the perfect casting, was Terrence Howard as
Rhodey.
Yeah, as his, military kind of guy. I thought it was so perfect because he carried that with such a serious presence, but it was also like joking around on the same level.
It was that same level that you could find the cocky, kind of like almost prick level, and still maintain the humor at the same time. It's such a balancing act, and the two of them together were perfect. And I think that's where obviously the issues came up. He knew that they were a perfect act, so he's like, fine, I'm gonna squeeze them a little bit, and then next thing you know, hey, here's Don Cheadle.
I mean, not much of a downgrade. I mean, Don Cheadle's amazing, so it's just also like it is a little bit of a downgrade, because I'm pretty sure Don Cheadle didn't invent an entirely new branch of mathematics. So we lost that opportunity in the Marvel Universe to learn about this new branch of mathematics we didn't know about before.
Yeah, the thing about Terrence Howard, though, is that I know that there are reports that he thought he should have top billing, even though he's not the main character. Because his star was actually on the rise. He was doing pretty good. And we got Robert Downey Jr., who's trying to get himself, back, his footing back into Hollywood, and again, going through that redemption and showing who he was. Now, my question to both of you, though, before we go on further into this, can you imagine any other or person playing the part, knowing, after seeing Robert Downey Jr. play, Tony Stark, Iron Man in multiple movies? Do you think that there's anybody else in, Hollywood at that time and even now that could have played that part better, or maybe along the same vein? Because I'm thinking, I look at it and it's like, he was perfect. He was perfect. He's Tony Stark.
I can't picture anybody that would have the same level of heart and the same of all that too, because I think that's the big piece that people look over. It's like, okay, great. Now you've seen him through all these movies. There was always that crazy piece to the acting outside the action, the funny stuff. He's a great actor. I just don't know if they would have been able to strike gold on that avenue of being able to have somebody bring that level of heart to the role too, because Tony Stark, reading the comic books and stuff as a kid growing up, he's a very complex character with plenty of personal problems, and the suit of armor is just as much of a metaphor as anything else, right? So that being said, I think it's similar to the conversation that you would have had back way when Sean Connery was no longer going to be James Bond. I mean, that was his role.
Yeah, I think you'd have a different version. Like, there are different directions you could have taken it, where it was more Batman. It was a little more serious. But then you could see, and the timing is actually somewhat close. But like, imagine like John Hamm getting in that role. Right. Somebody who can play serious, who can be a comedic guy, who can play troubled. Like, there's roots of something there. I think the other way it could have gone is someone like, and it wouldn't have been McConaughey, but a McConaughey-esque character, where he can play serious, but he's not as serious of a person, even though he perceives himself to be. So, like, those are kind of the directions I see it could have gone into that would have worked, but would it have been the phenomenon that it was? Probably not, because it touched a tone in the late 2000s in a very specific way.
Yeah. I think it's funny. One of the guys that actually also tried out and auditioned for Tony Stark, Iron Man, was, funny enough, a guy that got the role of his competitor in Iron Man 2, and that's Sam Rockwell. And apparently, and I think that's funny because it's one of those things. It's like, yeah, you failed out on this one, and then they go, hey, by the way, we need you to come in and play the competition. And he ended up, honestly, I thought he did a good spoof of Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark in that movie. I thought it was really funny, and then obviously he ends up being the villain in that movie because of what poor decisions he made. So I thought that was a really cool one.
I mean, Rockwell's awesome, and I think to be said for the first movie, like, to get past Iron Man, I think it was such a wild success that I think the stuff that was already in production, they didn't know how successful it would be. So I think they lost, until they regrouped, they didn't have that thread yet of what the tone of the entire series would be, which when we go to the next two, we kind of see they didn't have that tone decided yet.
I'm trying to find out how much money they made off the first Iron Man, but in reality, it was a $140 million movie is what I found. And I wanted to say it was like crazy.
Almost 600.
I figured it had to be. I thought they might have made the 100 million back in the first box.
Yeah. So it was almost, almost 600 total. And again, in 2008, like, wild. And also, like, say all you want
at that time.
Yeah. And also say what you want about some of the people. I mean, we had Jeff Bridges in it. Pulling Gwyneth Paltrow as a side character. I mean, we can talk about the efficacy of products that should or should not be inserted or steamed onto people of certain demographics. But what we can say is when she's on screen, she is a magnetic character, and also grounds it in like, hey, there is just infinite charisma in this movie, and that's the tone. But overall, wildly successful, and then rolls right into the next one too.
And that's one thing that you gotta. It's one thing that you mentioned her is because the character of was it Pepper Potts? She actually helps in the evolution of Tony Stark. He goes from this playboy kind of genius, and you see him, but eventually, as we go into the movies, you see his evolution and his humanity change. And all he wants to do now at that point is be a better man, be a better hero for the world. And it's in good part because of Pepper Potts. So she's kind of the behind the scenes kind of holding him grounded, like you said. She's the grounding force for a very manic Tony Stark in the early years.
The statue she provided him with the old arc reactor that saved his ass. Tony Stark does have a heart. Perfect metaphor for all of it, right? So I do want to move on, and I'm going to use the character pieces that you mentioned there a little bit with the issues with, eventually what became Rhodey. This movie was actually being filmed nearly in parallel, and that is the Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton and Liv Tyler as the main characters to this. So this is a movie that unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll give you 50-50, has really kind of fallen off the radar for most Marvel fans. The new version, or the new Captain America movie, is really the first acknowledgement of anything of this movie outside the actual character Bruce Banner and the Hulk. So I haven't seen it yet. I don't, no spoilers here. I'm not going to goof around with that. But on that avenue, this movie, like I said, was only trailing in production by like a few months. Same amount of money in the budget. You have all these good actors in it and actresses, and this should have been just another easy win. And it didn't turn into being the biggest of wins. It was a good win, but not. It kept the studio moving. But the Incredible Hulk itself, the story is that Edward Norton really wanted to change the character a lot. Like, he kind of almost even tried to take over the production from the director of the movie, The Incredible Hulk. So there's some of the drama and why he eventually didn't come back, and you get this, Bruce Banner's recast, or at least that's the story I've told. If you have any other details, feel free to throw that in. But I enjoyed this movie because there was another movie I got to see, an actual version of Bruce Banner, not the weird campy one that we got to see, like in, I want to say it was like 2002-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. It was like 5-6 years before.
You're talking about the Eric Bana version?
Yes.
Yeah, the Ang Lee version. Sorry for playing the old
bigger as he got more angry.
Yeah, I was playing the Lou Ferrigno Hulk music in the background. I don't know if it came through or not. But
oh, it didn't come through. At least
I was very
excited.
I love
about Ferrigno. I love that they had the guy, not only Lou Ferrigno as a cameo in the movie at one point, but they also had the gentleman that played actual Bruce Banner on the TV shows in the Avengers movie too. So that was spot on. Go ahead, Chris, if you want to talk about the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I gotta say, like, when I saw it, I love this version. I mean, I love Edward Norton. I think he was a very good choice for it because he can do both. And I think overall the movie was really good. And the fact that we haven't gotten a Hulk movie since, in many ways, is because, like, yeah, because I thought that was a really good version of it. And I think it was, like, I think switching to Ruffalo, also great choice, and plays more into the comedic sense. Edward Norton, for all his strengths, I wouldn't say comedic is his number one strength and wacky. He can play weird, he can play serious, he can play tragic. He can do a little bit of funny, but he's not a comedic, by and large, he's not a comedic actor. And I think that's what Ruffalo brings well, is both serious, pained, but also a little wacky at times in a way that
it's all about the delivery with Ruffalo, and that's what I love about it. It's not that he has to be super funny.
Yeah.
It's delivered properly.
But all that to be said, that movie was really good. I mean, Tim Roth, William Hurt, Liv Tyler, Tim Blake Nelson, like, it's a really well cast movie. It's a really well made movie. By and large, I haven't watched it probably close to since it came out. I think I maybe watched it when I went through the whole series again. I'd love to watch it again.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard to find, but now it's finally got with all the other ones. So Disney's finally sucked everything back up. Nice. And then that's the other part that we haven't mentioned in this conversation. People forget that Disney hasn't owned Marvel this whole time that we're talking about here. They did not officially own Marvel Studios until they were doing prep for filming the Avengers. So, like, they got the script. Maybe they didn't have the whole budget that they were going to have because, they didn't know what the budget was going to be, hoping for success on the other movies. This was a roll of the dice, and that was a nice little perk that really probably pushed them over the finish line to become what it did. But this movie, The Incredible Hulk, we've actually seen a lot of these characters finally come back. I was very fun to see the Abomination in the She-Hulk TV show. Same actor, same everything, really fun. Liv Tyler finally gets some justice in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and she's apparently in the new movie. I'm looking very forward to seeing her on screen again with that character, because it was a great character for her, and very conflicted as well. So, but just the action and stuff that built up that scene at the college campus where there's, they get the Hulk busting team in there for the first time, really hunting Bruce Banner's Hulk. And watching them get all angry, Hulk out in that point was very, very cool for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And to that point, made me forget that it's like, okay, great. This show, I enjoyed watching The Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno, but some cinematic crazy was a night and day difference. Crazy stuff. Tommy, is there anything you would like to add on The Incredible Hulk?
The one thing that I will say, and I'll say this about all of the movies up to this point, is, and I know talking about phase 1, phase 2, yes, we can get further into it, but the way that Marvel had taken these characters and actually made them look and be believable, they can actually exist, they can actually be these tangible people with these, either great abilities or super intelligence, but they made it to where it looked and feel like these could be actual characters in real life. And I think that's where a lot of these previous superhero movies, regardless of if it was Marvel, DC, whatever, they were campy. They didn't seem like they were real, like they couldn't exist. But now we're like, oh my God, I could be like walking outside and I could see an Avenger fly by, or Doctor Doom is going to come and destroy the world again, whatever. Right. But again, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have an issue with some of the other characters that have failed movies, is because they don't make them believable. They don't make them feel like they're part of it. So even and I mentioned the Eric Bana Incredible Hulk, that one just wasn't believable, and it was also pretty shitty, CGI.
It didn't help.
Literally jumping from state,
right?
Yeah, him literally jumping from state to state didn't help much either.
Right. I was like, you know what? If I could do that, I would, I wouldn't have to worry about buying plane tickets.
It's like an Indiana Jones dotted line thing going between cities across Europe. I mean, how much more can you be that?
That's a good one.
And I do have to say, also, we didn't mention the post-credit scenes and how revolutionary that was.
Yes, I was going to mention
back to that. Let's go back to that. Those two together is where I was going with this whole thing. So thank you, Chris.
Yeah, when it started in the first Iron Man, it was such there were people that didn't stay around, and they had no idea, and that started that entire trend of post-credit scenes in movies. Not to say it hadn't been done before, but it was mostly goof reels.
On that level.
We're talking Smokey and the Bandit, goof reels and stuff like that. Yeah. But that was
walking up and saying go home.
Yeah. Right. This was hey, you're part of something. You're part of this thing that's happening, and you're getting these hints into what's happening. And it was enough for all the hard Marvel people to be like, yeah, this is my thing. And everybody else whoa, wait, there's a whole nother thing coming. These aren't just movies. This is a thing. And that kind of started
that feeling what you got of the to be continued, or the watching comic book characters flip over from book to book. It was never done in that kind of level, to your point, Chris, in movies. Right. And then at the end of The Incredible Hulk, you see the General Ross is basically blitz drunk at the bar, and the door swings wide open with a white light with Tony Stark just there, and it's like, oh my God, I'm getting chills even thinking about it right now. They are connected. That was the seal of approval that this is actually happening. These movies are going to eventually lead up to the Avengers, and it just ends that cutscene with them saying, I have a team I'm putting together, and then done.
Yeah. Same Avengers time, same Avengers channel.
And the funny thing about that too is then it got to the point to where they were doing multiple. So like in the beginning of the credits, and then at the very end they would do like another 30-second spot, and it's like it forcing the audience to stick around, and like you said, and then YouTube got even bigger because people were starting to show those end credit scenes, and then you can even see now where people on YouTube will even break down the end credit scenes and like, did you catch this? Did you catch this? Things you missed in it, right? You know, and it's good because now with those end credit scenes, they make you kind of go back to some of those other movies to see, because sometimes they show, like especially in Incredible Hulk, there's a split second, of seeing Captain America's shield in the ice. There's like a split second of it, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we got something else to look forward to because something's leading into this.
So let's lead into that another one, because we got to talk Iron Man 2 really quickly. And for what everything was Iron Man 2 was the big budget sequel that everybody was hoping to get. But in story, it was pretty much the same thing. But what it really did was it really took the universe and took those credit scenes and really expanded it to it. You saw the workings of S.H.I.E.L.D. You saw all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes with Tony Stark's father with S.H.I.E.L.D. getting it off the ground, with Nick Fury literally just dropping a box of his old shit at his house and saying, you got to figure this out. He couldn't because he didn't have the tools at the time. You're going to figure it out. And then eventually you get what is a wasted character, in my opinion. I loved Mickey Rourke as Whiplash. I was waiting for that to be one of the bigger villains, and he unfortunately kills him off. So
really?
See Whiplash in any other movies.
Yeah, he was one of the ones I liked the least. Like one of my least favorite villains of the entire entire run. Yeah. And also everything's been done, so don't take like that scene in Monaco on the racetrack is like so Dark Knight Returns Frank Miller, which I'm sure Frank Miller's also probably wrote some of those Iron Man things back in the day or something too. Who knows? But like that, Frank Miller, like that scene from the DC animated movie is so like burned into my head when Bruce Wayne driving on like a track in like Monaco kind of thing, and it's like, all right, we're kind of grabbing at straws.
But it was cool. I think we got to see the different suit for the first time in that scene, though, with the suitcase suit.
Right.
Yeah, and it did get to bring in so many different things, different angles, and it did open up him as a distressed person more. But it didn't
Barry at that point.
Yeah, and it didn't love
the suit was killing him.
Yeah, and I didn't love the whole movie, but by and large, it did succeed in what it was trying to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Things grounded was my biggest thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I agree with you, Chris. To me, I think Whiplash was a throwaway character. There just really wasn't any meat and potatoes. So what? He was the Russian version of Tony Stark, basically, but if I don't think
a lot
he
better
was
in the comic books. Just gonna say
right.
that.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, well, that's the source material. But again, I think he was a throwaway character. They probably could have thrown in any other Iron Man villain and did the same thing.
Same effect.
Really never fleshed him out. They never really gave him, in my opinion, his just due. If he's this like big baddie, then give him something more. But eventually to me, Iron Man 2, as good of a movie as it is, I don't see it as, I would say out of the 3 Iron Man movies that we have, Iron Man 1 is the best one, and the other 2 were just kind of filler points at that point.
Yeah, I mean, they could have easily thrown in Boomerang, who was a former Major League Baseball player who becomes a boomerang throwing villain for the Secret Empire. I mean, like, what kind of rich backstory could we have gotten from Boomerang, from Tales of Astonish number 81 from 1966?
And to Tommy's point, insert villain here was basically what it could have been, because you do have the other villain, as I mentioned, in Justin Hammer, his competitor, trying to just literally take a dump at his, the Stark Expo and make all of the Iron Man suits look obsolete was his goal. So that was other piece of that whole thing. But like I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time when we only got like 15 or so minutes left
Yeah, let's
on
hammer.
Iron Man 2. Let's move forward to
Oh,
the
boy.
yeah, exactly. Let's
wish I
move
did that on
forward to the
purpose.
job. Yeah, I know, right? Let's move forward to the movie that ended up becoming, I'll say, the linchpin of the whole thing, and that is Thor. You have them gearing up, and they knew this already. We didn't. That Loki is going to be the villain for the Avengers movie. So if Thor fails, you fucked up 2 movies.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're not going to end up having, a great villain or anybody that's going to be realizing what it was. And I think this is the other really weird thing too here that I just learned today. The gentleman that was cast to be Tom Hiddleston as Loki originally actually auditioned to be Thor and was this close to being Thor. So moved him over to being what is, in my opinion, one of the better villains in the 21st century so far. And to your guys' thoughts, what is your opinion on Thor? Because this is a movie that had to be grounded in some fashion to be on any kind of level with the other movies. And I think they did a great job of being able to ungod Thor and bring him back into reality. And a fun story.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so like this, I think the Thor run was my least favorite of the runs of the movies. I thought, we're not talking about the second one, but I thought the second one just like actively was not a good movie.
Yeah,
I think the first one was entertaining. I think the first one was entertaining. I mean, it had a lot of gravitas. The gravitas from all the serious, like old school, like Shakespearean style actors. You're in Stellan Skarsgård. You're getting, you're getting Idris Elba. You're getting like all these, Anthony Hopkins, Rene Russo.
Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Right. You're furious, like hard actors. And I think that was the point of it, right? That this should feel bigger. It should feel godlike and legendary. I think they did a really nice job of that with Natalie Portman.
I believe the director was mostly a Shakespearean kind of level director for the most part. So it was like, yeah, exactly. So it was
he's done so much of that.
Chris, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, yeah, you're right. Kenneth Branagh has done so many Shakespearean things and other Poirot movies, which whatever, who cares? So by and large, I think it was successful to carry Thor and get Loki in place to feel important. Mm-hmm. I don't like Loki as a villain particularly because I think I already knew too much of where it had to go. So it always just felt like a stepping stone, and I never like
you could see
stepping stone villains.
That was the problem.
So
right.
So
my thought on this, and I'm probably going to be controversial, is Thor was an okay movie to me. To me, it's a filler. It's taking everything that I got from all the little Easter eggs and breadcrumbs from the end credit scenes, and it kind of just added a little bit more to it. But to me, yes, you get introduced to the character of Thor, you get introduced to the character of Loki, and you get to know about Asgard and everything. But at the same time, to me, all it is I'm using this now to see if I can get all of the little pieces that's going to go into the next movie, and again, I throw it in there in the same realm of Iron Man 2. Was it a needed movie? Maybe not, but at the same time, it's just a little piece. And like you said, it's a linchpin, but do I need to watch that linchpin in order to get what I need to get out of this whole universe? Not necessarily. I can still get everything I need to go forward. And I could have probably gotten Thor added into the second half of another movie and still got what I was supposed to get.
And I'll back off on that same idea here, Tommy, that it introduced you to the bigger world. There's more things going on in the Marvel universe than just Earth. And to our buddy Travis here, the Asgardian elements were done very well. What was going on? You didn't see any of that culture. You didn't know about the realms and all that kind of stuff without this movie. And you did establish the fact that Thor can be a badass, right?
And you had to open that up too.
Correct. Yeah. And you needed especially with what they did in the Avengers movie. If you skip over the Thor movie and you don't know how powerful Thor is, to all of a sudden see him fighting the Hulk.
Right.
It's going to be a bit of a
Right.
jump. So people
Show
that
me
read, like
God.
me and everybody else that read the comic books, maybe it's not as
Yeah.
much of a stretch, but the random person showing up in the movie theater is going to be like, wait, what? So,
Yeah.
but I
I
do
get it.
love the fact that you did degrade and downgrade him for the majority of the movie. After you do see him literally taking on frost giants and all these monster things, there was something fun to me to see him just as the average human being trying to get his hammer back and then not being able to pick it up. That kind of the, old
Classic
like
comic
Greek
book
myth kind of
story.
like thing. Correct. It was
Yeah.
really cool to see for that to me. But and then in my opinion, it might have one of my favorite Stan Lee cameos of all time. Him trying to pull the freaking hammer out of the ground with his truck, and the whole thing just goes. And he goes, "Oh, did it work?" It's so silly and stupid.
Yeah.
I was never in a million years gonna guess that Stan Lee was driving that truck, and then just to see him there, spot on. But we'll talk more Stan Lee to end the show on some fun here in a minute. But I think, like I said, you had to establish that universe to establish the fact that you were going to have Loki as your main villain, even pushing the galactic stuff even further toward Thanos eventually, because this is one of those things too that everybody tends to forget. No Infinity Stones, nothing but origin stories, but everybody started to see some of these pieces that in the next few movies that, hey, this could be building even something bigger than the Avengers. And I think that's where you start to see in the next movie that we have to talk out here before we talk the Avengers, and that is Captain America, the first Avenger. And to me, this is actually my favorite one out of all of them. I do love the first Iron Man. It's really, really close to me. But we've seen some different things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to this. You've seen something that was a little bit more Shakespearean. You saw a true origin story in the, Tony Stark thing. You saw a tragedy with somebody like fighting themselves basically in the Hulk. And some of these different things that Marvel can do. They didn't do anything like the Captain America movie in any movies like this for comic book crossovers that were a period piece. But how do you have the story of Captain America without showing what he did in World War II? You had to do it.
Yeah, and I think
Right.
that also opened up the past. It opened up the rich background that became something that was needed to mine for, the extent of all the movies to come. You needed to be able to mine the past and, mine, Howard Stark that was mentioned before, mining Hydra,
That's so cool.
the thinnest of veils, the thinnest
Yep.
of veils to like actual villains. And it was
And a movie
like,
that really had a ton of special effects in it too, because that movie fails if you don't de-age Steve Rogers or Chris Evans' character, Steve Rogers, to being the
Yeah.
skinniest little person on the planet.
and I think that was that at the time. I think we're also so wowed by the level of effects that they accomplished and how seamless most of it was. And I thought that was a great feature of it. And then we really did get a really good story that was pretty grounded consistently through the whole thing.
Again,
Minus
it's one of
the
those.
fact we
It's
have a
one of
super soldier.
again, it's one of those stories where you could honestly, and being a guy who was in the military, you can honestly believe that maybe the military does have this secret, laboratory where they're trying to, make super soldiers and stuff. I mean, I remember when I went to boot camp, we used to walk the gambit, and they used to, have the shotguns, and you just walk down, and they just pump you with a bunch of crap, whatever it is, just to inoculate you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask this question because I agree with you, Craig. Captain America by far is my favorite out of them all, because it does tell a very rich story. It goes back into the past. It tells the origin story in a very good way too, and the pacing is actually very good. But because of the introduction of Howard Stark, do you think that Captain America, the first Avenger, should have been early on in the series, or do you think that where it's at is better? Because I think Captain America, First Avenger, probably should have been either before Iron Man or between Iron Man and the Hulk. So then this way you get that understanding of that scene where you see the flyby and you see Cap's shield in the ice.
Yeah. I like the sandwich that they ended up creating because this is my thought anyway. You created two movies at the beginning that were based off of, I'll say, mad scientist experiments, right? You knew the story of the Hulk. It was an accident. He, it was given to him in that accident, his powers. It's what saved his life, allegedly, right? Iron Man makes himself a superhero. But in the end of the day, is you have two geniuses that, more or less became super. Thor, given God right? So, but then you see Cap, who goes through all these struggles and everything, and is the scrawny kid, wants to help, wants to do the right thing, and eventually, obviously, is gifted these superpowers and becomes that superhero that you do know. I don't know if you get that same effect if you move Cap to the front because of the period piece stuff that you would have had to still do. I don't know. I really think, I don't know if you could have started it better than with Iron Man. I really don't.
Yeah, I think if anything, yeah, if you did move it, I think it would probably be to that in between, like Iron Man and Iron Man 2. Mm-hmm. So you'd have, I think starting it with Iron Man was the thing that made the whole thing work. Because this was, it had some comedy, but like that set everything up. And I think it was a very successful, this is a successful last one before hitting the Avengers, because you didn't get him modern that much.
Right.
No.
Like it was,
you got a glimpse, and they even cheated it at it.
Right,
basically a movie of his backstory.
Yeah, so you didn't get like the rest of it, which I think also set up so much of the comedic relief for the Avengers itself.
Yeah. Thank you, Travis. Awesome comment. Phase 1 did do a great job of planting the seeds in fun ways to keep the audience moving. But the one thing I think we finally got in the Captain America movie, and this is one of the many reasons I enjoy this one out of the most, you got a real villain. And I still don't think you got I'll say the peak of what the Red Skull could have been, especially with Hugo Weaving behind the helm of that character.
Great choice.
Speaking of casting, oh wow, the way that movie starts off with him going after what we all found out to be the Tesseract or the Space Stone, him just literally blitzing into a town and stealing it. That's how you started the movie off. There was no other movies like that in the Marvel movies up to that point that start off with a villain as the main focus. And it slowly shifted into the fact of seeing Steve Rogers being the person it is. And for somebody as bad as he was with, the Red Skull, you needed that equal good that you eventually built up, and you saw the progression. And near the end of the movie, you see a very, very frustrated Red Skull yelling out, "You're failing!"
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to be I think that's the biggest challenge with Captain America, is that he's such a pure face, right? He's top 100% pure face, and he's not the conflicted, dark, he's not an anti-hero in any way. He is 100% straight good guy
clean
face. And that's what he is, and it's really hard to sometimes ground that, because you have to fight such pure badness because you're so purely good, and that's where you need that challenge in front of you.
That's the beauty of that period piece, though, because you had a very, very, very clear worldly view of who was good and who was bad at that time. Being able to throw them both into that same universe.
Yeah, Golden Age Marvel, where we had that all the time. It was, hey, turns out that the Germans in the 40s, not great. Turns out
it's the reason Indiana Jones always had so many movies. Just saying.
Right. Right. We had the clarity of the gold, the gold era of DC and Marvel, where you could just throw in Nazis and communists, and it was like, hey, you got bad guys, cool.
Bad guys. Yep. Bad guys. And I will say that I love those little subtle hats or tips of the hat that they gave to the early comic books from the golden era, with the singing the Captain America song and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was a great little bit. to show that it's like, okay, maybe you don't just become a superhero overnight. You want to sell war bonds, yay! And it worked out eventually with him just getting frustrated and going to get his friend. And that was one of the tragic turns of the whole movie, that I knew that Bucky Barnes eventually was going to become what he did, but at the end of the day, was it going to happen that soon? I never thought in a million years. So here it is, right? Yeah, I do think that that's a fun one too. So Travis mentioning, I speculated maybe Doom comes from that universe where the Red Skull actually won. This is the horrible fun that we get to play with the multi-universe guys, but that's a whole nother, like, we can have a whole can of worms conversation there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that brings us to the Avengers, right? I mean this is the driver. This is what everything was leading to, and what changed the entire path of Marvel movies from then till now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The team finally came together, and I think the thing that Joss Whedon and the team did perfectly is they didn't come together perfectly. And a character that we hadn't talked about throughout these other movies, and he himself says that he is the glue, the actor that did this, to get in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to where he did. And that is the guy that played Agent Phil Coulson. So he ends up being the catalyst to the Avengers finally manning up and getting to work with each other. And unfortunately is over his demise. But if you watch the movie the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., wasn't exactly his demise. So
no,
that's what it is. But they were very individual at the beginning of that movie, and that catalyst obviously got them to be what they needed to be for the Battle of New York. And to put things cinematically fun, that was a hell of a special effects extravaganza at that time, to be able to pull off the Battle of New York, which was a good 30 minutes of the movie, and you got to see the best of Hawkeye, Hulk, Black Widow, pick all of them. The Avengers shone through in that, and some very funny bits too. I still, every time I think of somebody really truly getting their ass kicked, I think of that scene where the Hulk is literally slamming Loki around and then says, "Puny God." Go ahead, Tommy. Put your 2 cents in on the Avengers movie here, because Chris already let us off.
So with the Avengers and everything, and I found this to be interesting, that I heard somebody say that throughout this you have the Hulk, you have Banner in this conflict back and forth, and something that I found was funny, and it does make sense, is that all of the Avengers except for one always refer to the Hulk as Banner, and the Hulk is not Banner. The Hulk is Hulk. Bruce Banner is Bruce Banner. So he never responds to them in kind, but the only Avenger that actually responds to him is in that Battle of New York, is Captain America, and all he says is Hulk smash. And you see the Hulk, he gets that smile on his face, and he goes and he does what the Hulk does, because he finally was referred to by who he was. Yes, he may be the character may be a split character, but it's Bruce Banner that is split. The Hulk is the Hulk, and so when you finally acknowledge who that person is, or who that character is by who they are, then because the Hulk's like, I'm not Banner, and you see that throughout as we go further into the character development of Bruce Banner and the Hulk in the later movies, because Hulk doesn't want to play anymore sometimes,
Well, and I think it also shows, like, this is where I think the first one, you don't feel it quite as viscerally, is that it's showing that you have to come together and embrace the differences to make the team better.
Right.
And over time, that just gets hammered so hard into your head that it gets redundant. But it still felt fresh, right? Where all the differences needed to come together. You needed to struggle. You needed to go through, like, hey, Captain America learning about modern times and bringing in a dark, moody Hawkeye, and and the struggles of
what happened in Budapest.
So I think that's the thing is like this. It felt very fresh when we watched this, and those effects and the scale, all of it felt very fresh, very polished, in a very different way than the Nolan Batman movies that were going on at the same time.
Right.
It was a completely different spectacle, and I think it accomplished feeling completely separate from their rival comic movie style that was going on. And this this set the way all the rest of these phases would go, was this feel of this push and pull of the team, the push and pull of characters trying to fit in or not fit in. And I think that turned into a wildly successful movie that broke records for sales and broke records for people talking about it.
I don't know if you're ever going to see another, I'll say, cinematic event that the Avengers ended up being, because how often are you going to get to see this many known characters come together so well in one movie? Think about that. You had all these great movies on their own, and then you're putting them together in a movie that was just under 3 hours. And I sat in that movie theater the first time I watched it, and that didn't feel like 3 hours. It felt like that. Gone. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. But you did see to your point, the dynamic that was created, that fight with Thor and Iron Man in the woods beginning of the movie, which ends with Captain America getting the hammer. He goes, "Oh, you want the hammer?" And no, don't give him the hammer, it's a bad And then you see that end, and it's like Thor has that moment. He goes, "Shit, I'm kind of dealing with peers." You know what I mean? And you saw it on the face when the clearing of all the trees and everything, and Loki's just sitting there watching, which was the creepier thing about the whole part of that, and how it eventually got to where it got to. But from those parts where you see that, you do see that leadership or the roles starting to land into place. By the time you get to the Battle of New York, you don't have Tony Stark poking fun and trying to say he's the smartest person in the room anymore. You have him going, "Call it, Cap," because you have the guy with the most field experience all of a sudden leading in the field. Where in the laboratory, okay, great. You know what? Probably should trust Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, but they figure out their click a little bit. And then obviously you see that continue out throughout the other movies, and eventually even playing with that same problem again in the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron. But to me, that was the really cool thing about that whole thing, is you did see that it wasn't just a perfect coming together, which you got in the comic books in that first one, if you ever went back and read it. And it just fell into place, and it became a movie phenomenon that we still get to enjoy to this day. And hopefully they just start getting some of these stories back again, because that's where they're missing, I think, right now, is on the story part.
Yeah. It's long-term storytelling.
On the Avengers, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think
I'll be right back.
Yeah, I think that I think the thing that was most successful was something that I think you and I both love in these kind of fantastical worlds, whether it be wrestling, whether it be other things, is long-term storytelling. Having a real thought of where things are going, and not just flying by the winds of the moment, is having this long goal. And you can see all of these thoughts came together. Now, not perfectly, because there wasn't a clear picture of what the tone of everything was when this started. But the fact that all of these divergent stories came together to turn into something that was better than the sum of the parts was a pure fact of a singular vision that was put together by Kevin Feige and put together by the entire Marvel Studios team to turn all these different directors, all these different stories into one cohesive finale that completely changed everything. And that long-term storytelling is what makes people care. And it's why so many of the modern things have failed, is a complete lack of long-term storytelling. You don't want to feel like you're being jerked around. You want to feel like you're in good hands. You want to feel like you're being...
And that's what those movies gave you.
Yeah.
100%. And then to put even a perfect bow on that piece of that conversation here, Chris, you did see that part with the mid-movie, you get to see Loki talking to Thanos finally. And like I said, it'd been teased a little bit, but everybody's like, no, they're not gonna do that. It was one of those like, it'll never get to that kind of like stories. And then you, like I said, you all of a sudden had the Tesseract, which is one of the Infinity Stones. So it kept looking like it was going to start building that direction. But you finally saw the confirmation of everybody's theories with seeing Thanos for the first time and really showing it in a fashion that this is going to build even to something bigger than just the Avengers. And you're going to have to rely on the Avengers to be the only thing that's going to snuff out the evil, and epic proportions in that whole piece of that too.
Yeah.
But just to see frickin' Thanos at the end of that movie finally turn around and that's right, I am here.
Well,
the big jaw and everything.
Right. I think that's the thing, is that when I said long-term storytelling too, is that yes, you need to have a target for the end, but if the individual steps towards the end also suck, people aren't going to want to pay attention to the long-term storytelling. The individual pieces also have to be interesting and deep and important in of themselves, and people have to care about the individual characters too. Backstory needs to aid in the end, not be a well that everybody has to learn infinite about. So I think this was the right amount where everybody was happy at the end of phase one.
Mm-hmm.
The deep nerds were happy, the casuals were happy, the mediums were happy. Everybody.
Only minor complaints.
Right. Almost everybody was happy at the end of phase one, which means phase one was an outstanding success.
Correct. You didn't get the world of what we all of us get to argue with on Nerddom Fun. It's like, who shot first?
Yes.
It's just like,
George Lucas.
Exactly. So there's that. So on that note, I don't want to continue going too long, guys, but is there anything either of you would like to wrap up as far as the Avengers conversation before I give Chris here his shameless self-promoting plug here at the end of the show?
The only thing that I want to throw in there is, this is really the first time that you see a series of movies all intertwined with each other, and that made people, even if you like me, even if you were to throw out some of them, like, okay, this was kind of just a filler movie and stuff, but you still kind of had everything, so it brought people in. So even if you were a Fairweather fan like me, I knew the source material, but I didn't read the source material, so I had an understanding of it, but at the same time I could follow along. So, but I was wrapped up into it because I was like, well, I'm seeing bits and pieces that reminded, I got from the previous movie from a different character. It's not like I was, these movies were great. And the one thing that we start seeing is they get better and better and better, and they start bringing in more characters and different groups, like the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man and Wasp, and how all of those stories are kind of intertwined as well. And I think it's great. And some of those movies are standalone, even though they are part of this bigger universe. And I absolutely love them. The only thing that I got to say now, though, is just like Star Wars, Disney has saturated the market and is now putting out what I consider is very subpar material. And I think it's just because they're going to sell it until nobody wants it anymore, and they're not giving us any compelling stories anymore. It's like, oh, we got another offshoot character set. Let's throw them in there and see how that works.
Yeah, exactly. To Travis, Travis has got another wonderful comment in the comments, but it doesn't really, unfortunately, fit perfectly. But he's got a wonderful story here of where the Marvel Cinematic Universe should or could go to eventually get to Doctor Doom in our comments right now. So, but to that point, that's the problem. You don't have that. Where do you get to from here? And I'm sorry, just throwing another Ant-Man movie with a guy with a big head as MODOK on is not getting you there. But totally agree. So that's where I'm at. But Chris, It's the end of the show. You're our guest. You get your shameless self-promoting bit here before I do our closeout. It's been a pleasure. We were very happy to have you here and have a great talk with you tonight.
No, it was a blast. I'm hoping to come on again and talk about other things that I can nerd out about forever.
Yeah, there you go. Spirits boy here. No, I was kidding.
Yeah. So I'm the host of the Food About Town podcast, going on for 13 years now, and also the co-founder of the Lunchador podcast network. You go to lunchador.org to check out all of the different shows. We have been going on for a little over a year now, and we're really excited to be on the ground floor of trying to build something for Rochester, for the people that are doing the work of making really cool things happen in town. And not just from the top down. This is from the bottom up, from people who love being in Rochester and love where we are and where we can go. So go to lunchador.org and check out all the shows. And I do hope people check out some of the new ones that we just have come out. We also have Paulie Guglielmo as part of the network. So if you know Guglielmo sauce, so Paulie's been a member since we started. But I hope people check out on nights and weekends our new show about music that just started a few weeks ago, and also check out In This Moment, which are audiobooks about prominent members of the Black community in Rochester. We're super proud of what we're doing with them, and really hope you join and tell us what you want to hear on upcoming episodes.
Deal. Sounds like a plan. And I do have to say, I have one comment from Narada that was not in our main chat, but it was on our Instagram chat. He goes, "Thank you for having Chris, the podcast king of Rochester, on the show. It was very fun to watch." So, Chris, It's been a pleasure. Obviously, I look forward to seeing you at work tomorrow. We'll continue, but you're welcome anytime, my friends. So, thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Yes.
All right. And Tommy, any last notes for you? Or should I just get us
No, I'm not gonna steal anything from Chris, but I will say this, Chris. If you want to take on another show, you could be a part of the network. Just saying.
Well, I'm hoping we can do our follow-up episode over here at the studio, and we can put it out on the shelves that are right around me.
Good deal.
But yeah, I don't have any shameless self plugs as of right now. Because I got a few. As you know, I always got some pokers in the fire right now. But once things come to fruition, we will do. But I'll say it. I said it in the beginning of the show. Again, got asked to host and judge another cosplay coming up in July, which is one of my favorite things to do. If you have not seen the entire video of the cosplay contest from Niagara Falls, which was from last week, I highly recommend you. It's not the greatest video, but you get to hear all of the commentary and me just being a nutcase on my friend, friend of the show, a friend of the show, and friend of our my co-host that was over at the first time. Her name is she goes by Blue Kitten Cosplay, all one word, and check out her YouTube channel. She's a big cosplayer, and she's become a fan of the show, and she helps promote our show. So shout out to her, and go and watch that video. It's hilarious the way that I'm a 50-year-old man, and I'm just being a nutcase.
Yeah, there is that. Good deal. Embarrassing your daughter, usually. That's all I remember.
Always embarrassing my daughter.
That's just part of being a dad. So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much for all the wonderful comments and everything in the chat this evening. It has been a pleasure talking with Tommy and Chris here this evening about all things the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1. So, if you haven't figured it out, that might mean there's some down the line there, Phase 2, so on and so forth. There is just a lot of Marvel to talk out, even in an hour tonight, like we talked. Make sure you tune in every week. We are here at 7 o'clock Eastern time every Sunday with a new topic of all things nerdy and fandom. We will be here ready to chit chat. And if you missed the live show, make sure you catch us wherever you get your podcasting pleasures from. We are there. I hope you have a great evening and a great week. Cheers.
Good night, everybody.